I will never forget that morning. It began like any other, a calm, clear day with the air crisp and fresh. The sky was free of clouds, the kind of day where you would expect nothing unusual to happen. But all of that changed in an instant. The siren from our emergency vehicle echoed through the quiet morning, breaking the stillness. The message we received was chilling: car submerged in the river. There's a baby inside. Those words froze me in my tracks. A baby? In a submerged car? At first, it didn't make sense. But there was no time to question. The urgency was real, and our training kicked in. We rushed to the scene as quickly as we could. The road leading to the river was winding and narrow, flanked by thick trees. The river itself, known for its strong and dangerous current, was a constant reminder of how quickly nature could take control. The closer we got to the scene, the more the fear set in. Each kilometer felt like an eternity. When we finally arrived, the sight before us was nothing short of terrifying. The car was partially submerged, with only the top of the roof above the murky water. Inside, we could see the baby's car seat gently rocking back and forth, a chilling sign that the infant was still trapped in there. The sound of someone shouting, "There's a baby in the car!" pierced the air, sending shockwaves through us. That simple statement made everything real. We knew that saving this child depended on how quickly we could act. The urgency was overwhelming, and the clock was ticking. Sergeant Ribeiro, our team leader, wasted no time. He quickly took charge, organizing the team and distributing equipment. We had no choice but to prepare for a dive. The water was freezing, visibility was near zero, and the current was strong enough to sweep us away. Every second mattered, and we needed to act fast, without hesitation. I stepped into the water, feeling the ice-cold grip of the river surrounding me. The weight of the current made it difficult to move, but the clock was unforgiving. The seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. All we could do was wait in that agonizing silence while Sergeant Ribeiro dived into the dark water. Every moment that passed made it harder to breathe. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, we heard the confirmation: he found the car seat. But then, something unexpected happened. As the sergeant tried to pull the car seat free, it didn't budge. The seat was tethered to something, a thick chain, wrapped around a heavy box sitting in the back seat of the submerged car. What was that box doing there? Why was it tied to the car seat? Our focus had to remain on the baby, and we worked together as best we could. With effort and precision, we finally freed the seat from the chain. We pulled the child from the car. The baby was limp, wrapped in a wet blanket, without any sign of life. Fear gripped the team. We immediately began CPR and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, desperately trying to revive the fragile life in our hands. Time seemed to stop as we fought for each passing second. Then, against all odds, it happened. The baby's cry echoed through the air. A sign of life. The baby was alive. But even with the baby rescued, the mystery of the box still haunted me. What was it hiding? What secrets lay inside? This was just the beginning of a much larger story. What happened that day would haunt me for the rest of my life. What seemed like a routine emergency call quickly turned into the most intense and disturbing case of my career. Once we pulled the baby from the submerged car and rushed it to the hospital, the real nightmare began to unfold. I sat there, drenched and exhausted, but I couldn't shake the image of that car seat. The way it had rocked so gently in the water, the sight of that tiny life hanging in the balance. What had really been going on? The baby had survived the impossible, but there were still so many unanswered questions. The box, the chain, they weren't just coincidental. They were part of something bigger. The baby, in all its fragility, was tied to a larger web of secrets that we were only beginning to uncover. After the baby was safely in the hospital, I returned to the site of the accident, determined to solve the riddle of that mysterious box. The riverbank was quiet now, but the lingering tension in the air was palpable. We weren't just dealing with a car crash. We were facing a much darker reality. I couldn't let go of the fact that the box had been tied to the baby's car seat. Someone had placed it there, and there had to be a reason. The police arrived shortly after, and we began to investigate the area more thoroughly. Our team had been the first on scene, and while our focus had been on rescuing the child, now we had to focus on what lay beneath the surface. What had that box contained? What had it been meant to hide? After several hours of searching the area, we managed to get the box open. As soon as the lid lifted, we were hit with the smell of old paper and musty leather. Inside were stacks of documents, photographs, and medical records, some dating back several years. There were several photos of missing children, all marked with dates and locations. But the one photo that caught my attention was of a baby, about the same age as the one we had just rescued. The same cold fear crept over me as I realized the horrifying truth. These were children. Real children, who had gone missing. And the records suggested something sinister. The names on the certificates were all fake, fabricated identities. There were adoption papers, hospital records, and even social security numbers that didn't add up. But the most chilling discovery was a document with the words "property" stamped on it, alongside the name of the baby we had just saved. Property. That word echoed in my mind. How could anyone refer to a child as property? I didn't understand. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was part of something much larger, a network I hadn't even begun to comprehend. I held the document in my hands, feeling the weight of its implications. This was a human trafficking operation, and we had stumbled right into the middle of it. But the question that kept running through my mind was, why was this baby left behind? Why had he been placed in a car that was submerged in the river? Was it an accident? Or was it intentional? Soon after, more disturbing reports came in from the local authorities. Witnesses had spotted someone fleeing the scene. A man had been seen swimming frantically away from the car before emergency crews arrived. Who was he? And why was he running? These were questions that gnawed at me, but as we gathered more information, the puzzle pieces began to fit together in a terrifying way. This wasn't just a baby rescued from an accident. This was a small part of a much larger network, a complex and dangerous world that most people didn't even know existed. And now, it was our responsibility to tear it down, to uncover the truth and, more importantly, to find out who was behind it. But as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't going to be an easy fight. The deeper we dug, the more resistance we faced. This wasn't a small-time operation, it was global. Powerful people were involved. The network was massive, and it wasn't going to let us expose them without a fight. The question was, how far were they willing to go to protect their secrets? The investigation into the baby's origins was just beginning, and already, it felt like we were being watched. We were stepping into a dangerous world, and the tension in the air grew thicker every day. But we couldn't stop. Not now. Not when there were lives at stake. The days after the discovery felt like a blur of constant movement. We were no longer just working a simple case. We had uncovered something far darker than any of us had expected. What began as a simple rescue mission had become an investigation into a global human trafficking network. And that innocent baby, pulled from the cold depths of the river, was the key that could bring it all down, if we could stay ahead of those who would do anything to protect it. As the investigation progressed, it became painfully clear that this was not just a local issue. This was a well-established, international operation. The documents we found in the box, the adoption papers, the false identities, the missing children's records, painted a grim picture of a vast, organized system. And it wasn't just about children being trafficked, it was a global network of corruption that reached into the highest echelons of power. The more we uncovered, the more it felt like we were chasing shadows. But there were breakthroughs. We managed to track down the person who had been seen fleeing the scene, swimming away from the submerged car. Witnesses identified him as a known associate of a criminal group operating in the region. He had been involved in several cases of missing children, but so far, he had always managed to slip through the cracks. It was clear now that his connection to the baby was not just coincidental. He was a part of something much larger. We learned that the network had been operating for years, silently manipulating the lives of countless children, selling them to the highest bidder, exploiting them for unspeakable purposes. These were lives destroyed before they even had a chance to start. And the worst part was that the operation was so well hidden, so carefully protected, that no one had even begun to notice. The authorities had been blind to it, and anyone who got too close to the truth was either silenced or redirected. It was a system designed to stay hidden, no matter what. The deeper we dug, the more obstacles we encountered. Law enforcement was being met with resistance at every turn. Leads that seemed promising were blocked by bureaucratic red tape or, worse, by people in positions of power who clearly didn't want the investigation moving forward. It became clear that whoever was behind this network had powerful allies, people who would do anything to keep their secret safe. Our every move was being watched. The closer we got to the heart of the operation, the more dangerous it became. But we couldn't stop. The baby had already survived so much. His very survival was a symbol of resilience, of hope. And as we delved deeper into the case, it became clear that he was more than just a victim. He was the first step in uncovering a global conspiracy that reached into the darkest corners of society. If we failed to act, if we let this slip through our fingers, we would be allowing countless more children to be lost forever. We started receiving more threats. An anonymous call, a warning shot fired in the dead of night, these were just the beginning. The fear of what was coming next hung over us, but we pressed on. The investigation was starting to yield results, but the closer we got to exposing the truth, the more dangerous it became. One morning, we received a lead that would change everything. A small, unassuming document that had been overlooked in the initial investigation turned out to be a crucial piece of the puzzle. It was a list of transactions, one that detailed the movement of children across international borders. The names on that list were linked to individuals from several high-profile industries, politicians, businessmen, even celebrities. It was becoming clear that this wasn't just about trafficking for labor or sexual exploitation. This was a far-reaching conspiracy that involved the very fabric of society. I couldn't help but wonder how many people were involved in keeping this operation running, how many others had turned a blind eye, or worse, profited from the suffering of these children. The more we discovered, the more our own lives were at risk. We were not just fighting criminals. We were taking on a system of corruption so deeply entrenched that it seemed impossible to bring it down. But we had no choice. We couldn't back down now. The truth had to come out. We had to keep going, no matter the cost. The stakes were higher than ever, and we could feel the weight of it with every passing day. With each passing day, the investigation became more dangerous and more convoluted. The deeper we dug, the more we discovered that the people behind the human trafficking network weren't just criminals. They were part of a well-established, nearly indestructible system. Powerful, untouchable individuals were operating in the shadows, and they were willing to do anything to keep their secrets hidden. We were running out of time, and the closer we got to the heart of this operation, the more perilous it became for all of us. The pressure on our team was suffocating. Every lead we followed seemed to be met with a wall of resistance. There were moments when I felt like we were being watched, our every move tracked, every step anticipated. It was as if the very system we were fighting against had eyes everywhere. We couldn't trust anyone. The idea that even those in positions of power might be working against us was a constant, unsettling thought. Then came the first real sign that things were taking a darker turn. We had just uncovered a major lead that could have cracked the case wide open. We had discovered one of the trafficking routes, a series of safe houses used by the operation to move children between countries. But before we could act, it was as if someone had anticipated our every move. The safe houses were emptied out, all the evidence vanished, and the people who had been involved? They disappeared without a trace. It was a devastating blow. But what hurt more was the realization that this network wasn't operating on a small scale. It wasn't just a few criminals running rogue operations. This was a well-oiled machine, and it had its roots in every level of society. We were no longer just facing criminals in the streets. We were up against a system that had infiltrated the very institutions meant to protect us. Law enforcement, politics, and business, their influence was far-reaching, and it seemed like there was no way to break through. As the investigation continued, the stakes couldn't have been higher. We discovered that the baby we had rescued was merely one small part of a much larger, more organized operation. The babies that had been disappeared weren't just being sold into forced labor or sexual exploitation. They were part of a vast trade that involved high-profile buyers from around the world. The more we uncovered, the more it became clear that these children were commodities, items to be bought and sold with no regard for their lives, their futures, or their well-being. Our sources inside the network grew quieter as the pressure mounted. People who had been helping us, reluctantly at first but with a growing sense of moral obligation, began to pull away. Threats, both direct and subtle, started to surface. Our phones were tapped. Our meetings were under surveillance. I felt a chilling fear every time I turned a corner, wondering if I was being followed. One night, after a long day of gathering information, I received an anonymous tip. It was a chilling message: stop where you are. There's more at stake than you know. If you continue, you'll never make it out alive. It was clear that the people behind this operation were willing to stop at nothing to protect their empire. But despite the threats, we couldn't stop. Every child rescued, every lead we followed, made the risk worthwhile. We were closer than ever to uncovering the truth. The net was tightening, and we were being forced into a corner. I could feel the urgency of the moment. We had no time to waste. As the investigation advanced, we were led to a hidden location, a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was the hub for one of the trafficking routes, and inside, we uncovered something that would change everything. Documents, passports, and flight records detailing the transportation of children across international borders. The scale of the operation was horrifying. But the most shocking discovery was a list of names. The list included politicians, business tycoons, and even members of the judiciary. These were people with the power to influence laws, decisions, and, ultimately, the fates of these innocent children. It was now abundantly clear. This wasn't just a local problem. This was a global conspiracy, and we were tangled in its web. The fight was no longer about bringing down small-time criminals. It was about dismantling a system that had been allowed to operate unchecked for years. We had to act. The time for subtlety was over. The web was unraveling, and we had a choice to make. Do we continue to push forward, risking everything to expose these monsters, or do we step back and let the system consume us as it had so many before? But there was no going back. We had seen the darkness. We had felt the fear. And now, we knew what had to be done. The risk was immense, but so was the reward. If we could expose the full extent of the operation, we could bring an end to the trafficking ring that had stolen so many lives. Just when we thought we had a grasp on the scope of the operation, the investigation took a turn that we weren't prepared for. The deeper we dug, the more we uncovered, but with each new discovery came the crushing weight of realizing how much more there was still to learn. And then, out of nowhere, came the first major revelation, a bombshell that would change everything. We had been tracking the movement of the children through various international routes, connecting the dots between missing persons reports, flight records, and documents we'd found at the warehouse. We thought we were getting closer to unraveling the operation. But we were wrong. We hadn't even begun to scratch the surface. A breakthrough came when we managed to get access to one of the trafficking ring's bank accounts. It was through a financial analyst working with law enforcement that we learned the most shocking piece of information to date. The political figure we had suspected to be involved, the one whose name had appeared on several records, was, in fact, only a pawn. The true mastermind was someone much closer to us, someone who had been helping guide the investigation all along. The realization hit us like a freight train. The person who we thought was on our side, feeding us information, helping us gather evidence, they were the real mastermind behind the operation. And we had been walking right into their trap. At first, it seemed impossible. How could we have missed it? How could someone so close to the investigation be the one orchestrating everything from the shadows? But as we connected the dots, everything started to fall into place. The investigator we trusted had been manipulating us from the start, feeding us false leads and carefully orchestrating every move we made. They had been playing both sides, working with the criminals and us, all while maintaining their cover. The shock of this revelation left us in disbelief. How could we have been so blind? This person had been one of the key figures in our investigation, guiding us toward the truth while, in reality, steering us away from it. They had created an elaborate facade of trust, manipulating our every move to protect the true scope of the operation. As we processed this, a wave of horror washed over me. All the evidence, the documents we thought were authentic, the testimonies from witnesses, it all started to look like a carefully crafted illusion designed to mislead us. The investigation we had thought was making progress was now exposed as a charade. And the worst part was that we had no idea how deep this person's involvement went. This was no longer just about uncovering a human trafficking ring. This was about exposing a web of lies and betrayal that stretched much farther than we ever could have imagined. We were no longer just fighting criminals. We were fighting someone who had infiltrated our own ranks, someone who had the resources, the connections, and the knowledge to hide in plain sight. The revelation hit everyone hard. For days, I couldn't stop replaying the moments when this person had been right next to us, feeding us information that we thought was vital. Every conversation, Every lead they had given us now felt like a lie. The guilt was overwhelming, knowing that we had unknowingly walked straight into their web. But the fight wasn't over. Far from it. Now, we had to move quickly. The longer this person stayed in the shadows, the more damage they could do. The first thing we did was isolate everyone involved in the investigation. We could no longer trust anyone without verifying their motives. The stakes had just been raised to an unimaginable level. We were no longer in control. And the person behind this, they were already 2 steps ahead of us. With this new information, we had no choice but to rework our entire approach. The plan we had been following was now completely compromised. We needed to find out who was really behind this operation, expose the mastermind, and take down the entire network before they could disappear for good. The real leader of the trafficking ring wasn't just a criminal. They were a manipulator, a puppet master pulling strings behind the scenes, using us to cover their tracks. As I sat in the dimly lit office, staring at the new evidence we had uncovered, the gravity of the situation settled in. We had to move fast. We had to confront the mastermind, but more than that, we had to uncover everything, the entire network, before it was too late. The first step was taking down the person who had betrayed us. And that would be no easy feat. They were still in the investigation, still hiding in plain sight, and we had no idea where their influence ended. We had to move cautiously, knowing that we were no longer just uncovering crimes. We were unraveling a conspiracy so deeply rooted that it threatened to collapse everything we knew. But there was no going back. With this revelation, the stakes were higher than ever. The clock was ticking, and we knew that if we didn't act soon, the entire operation could slip through our fingers, and the true mastermind would escape into the shadows forever. The days following our discovery of the mastermind's betrayal were filled with a sense of urgency that weighed down on all of us. We were no longer working against just a criminal network. We were now up against a powerful entity that could erase everything we'd worked for in an instant. The investigation had turned into a high-stakes race. We had to move quickly, and more importantly, we had to be smarter than ever. But the longer we spent chasing down leads, the more it became clear we were not in control anymore. After the revelation that the person we trusted was the mastermind behind the trafficking operation, everything felt uncertain. The carefully laid plans were now useless, and we were forced to improvise, to act on instinct and quick thinking. Our resources were stretched thin, and the risks were greater than ever. We had to confront this betrayal head-on. The first step was to expose the mastermind for what they were, a puppet master who had been playing us all along. But as we began to investigate them further, we realized just how far-reaching their influence was. They were connected to powerful people, individuals who could make the entire operation vanish in the blink of an eye. The truth we were uncovering was bigger than we ever imagined. There was no turning back now. We had to act quickly to expose the mastermind and bring them down before they had a chance to disappear, taking all the evidence with them. But every step we took seemed to be met with more resistance. Our communications were compromised. Phones were tapped. Our movements were being tracked. Whoever was behind this had resources we couldn't even begin to comprehend. We couldn't afford to make a mistake. Despite the growing tension, we managed to gather some new, critical information. A whistleblower, someone from inside the organization who had been working with us in secret, provided us with a list of locations tied to the trafficking operation. These weren't just warehouses or safe houses. These were high-level, hidden operations, where the trafficking ring coordinated the movement of children internationally. It was clear now that this was not just about selling children locally. It was a multi-country operation, with connections spanning continents. We had a choice to make: follow the leads to these safe houses, risking a dangerous confrontation with armed criminals, or focus on the mastermind, who was already slipping through our fingers. We decided to split the team. Some would continue to follow the leads on the trafficking routes, while others, including myself, would track down the mastermind before they could escape. The moment we split our focus, the stakes grew exponentially. We were now operating on 2 fronts, and the pressure on each of us intensified. But it was the best shot we had. As the team moved into position, preparing for the next phase of the operation, we received an anonymous tip, a message that sent chills down my spine. "The game is over. You're too late. No one can stop us now." It was a direct threat. Someone knew exactly what we were doing, and they were confident that we had already lost. Fear crept into my thoughts, but we couldn't afford to let it take hold. We had no choice but to press forward. The truth was out there, and it was our duty to find it, no matter what. As we moved to track the mastermind, we encountered more and more roadblocks. Every time we thought we were getting closer, we were pushed back. Someone on the inside was feeding information to the other side. Every move we made was countered. The feeling of being hunted was impossible to shake. It was as though the walls were closing in on us. But the most disturbing revelation came when we finally tracked down the mastermind's last known location. It wasn't just an isolated hideout. It was a mansion, protected by security forces that rivaled any government compound. The mastermind wasn't just a player in this operation. They were a kingpin, someone with immense power, wealth, and influence. This wasn't just a fight against criminals anymore. We were going up against someone who could bring down governments, who could erase evidence with a snap of their fingers. At that moment, I realized that this fight was about more than saving the children. It was about exposing a system of power and corruption that had been hidden for decades. We weren't just trying to stop a criminal operation. We were trying to take down a corrupt network that controlled entire sectors of society. We had a limited window. The mastermind was preparing to flee the country, and if they did, they would vanish without a trace. We had to strike now, before they disappeared. The decision to move in was made. But the consequences were far-reaching. The risks of confronting the mastermind in their fortress were overwhelming. Yet, if we didn't act now, everything we'd worked for, every life we'd saved, would be for nothing. We had to stop them, and we had to do it fast. The moment we received the tip about the mastermind's location, everything changed. Our team was mobilized, ready to take down the person who had orchestrated the entire operation. The mansion, the heavily guarded fortress, was our next destination. But just when we thought we were close to bringing this nightmare to an end, another devastating twist hit us, one that would shake everything we thought we knew about the case. We had managed to track down the mastermind's location with some degree of certainty, but as we approached, the air shifted. It felt like walking into a trap, yet we couldn't afford to hesitate. Our only option was to move in and take the shot. But when we arrived at the mansion, we were greeted by something entirely unexpected, an elaborate ruse. The mastermind wasn't there. It wasn't just that they had managed to escape. They had orchestrated their disappearance in a way that left us all wondering if we had been set up once again. The mansion was empty, as if they had been expecting us to arrive at this exact moment. But why? And what had they left behind? As we combed through the massive property, we found documents, files, and photographs, but they weren't just about the trafficking operation. There were new connections, names we hadn't encountered before. It was a web of power, politicians, business elites, and even figures within law enforcement who had been helping them orchestrate this entire operation from the shadows. But then, we came across something that changed the course of everything. Tucked away in a hidden compartment was a file marked, "The Final Phase." At first, we thought it was just another set of plans for the trafficking routes. But as we flipped through it, our hearts sank. This wasn't just about trafficking. This was about something far more sinister. The file contained plans for a massive international operation, involving the creation of false identities for hundreds of children. These children were not just being sold. They were being bred, systematically. The mastermind wasn't just running an operation. They were creating a system that would make the trafficking of children a business that operated on a global scale. They were exploiting human lives, not just to sell them, but to turn them into commodities, ensuring their existence was intertwined with lies and corruption at every level. As we continued to go through the files, we found something that sent chills down my spine. One of the names on the list was familiar. Too familiar. It was the name of someone I had worked with for years. A trusted ally. Someone I had believed to be a crucial part of this investigation. They had been feeding us information, guiding us, helping us uncover the operation. And now it was clear, they were at the heart of it all. This wasn't just a network of criminals. This was an organized system, a business that had been running for years, and it had taken root in the very people we had trusted the most. The realization hit me hard. We weren't just fighting criminals anymore. We were fighting a deeply embedded system of corruption that stretched into every corner of our society. The team was in shock. How had we missed it? How had we been so blind? The person we had trusted the most had been leading us right into the heart of this global conspiracy. They had been manipulating us, feeding us lies, creating false leads, and keeping us one step behind the real mastermind. But now, we knew the truth. The mastermind wasn't just some isolated criminal. They were part of a much larger network, and the people we trusted had been complicit in it all along. The corruption was too deep to ignore. This was no longer just about saving children. This was about exposing a system that had infiltrated every level of power and authority. The gravity of what we were facing settled in. This wasn't going to be easy. The people behind this operation had resources, influence, and the ability to silence anyone who got too close. But there was no turning back now. We had already uncovered too much. We had to stop them, no matter the cost. With this revelation, the investigation became more than just a case. It became a fight for everything we believed in, for justice, for the children whose lives had been stolen, and for the truth that had been buried in the shadows for far too long. We had no choice but to confront the mastermind and the network they had built. The clock was ticking, and we had to act before it was too late. The shock of this discovery, the realization that someone we trusted was at the center of it all, fueled a renewed sense of urgency. We couldn't let this go on any longer. We had to expose them, tear down their empire, and bring every person responsible to justice, no matter the personal cost. I had thought we had reached the point of no return after everything that had happened. The discovery of the mastermind's true involvement, the betrayal from within our own ranks, it felt like there was no coming back. But the truth was far more dangerous than we ever imagined. The final twist, the moment that turned everything on its head, came when we least expected it, and it shook us all to the core. After uncovering the extent of the mastermind's plan, we made our move. We had to act swiftly. We couldn't allow them to slip away again. The plan was simple: surround the location, apprehend the mastermind, and take down the entire network. But as we approached the place where we believed the mastermind was hiding, I began to sense something was off. The air felt thick with tension. It was too quiet. Something wasn't right. And then it hit us. The mastermind had played us yet again. The location we had believed to be their hideout, the fortified mansion we had already scouted, was a decoy. A trap designed to lure us in. And we had walked right into it. Our team was ambushed. Out of nowhere, armed guards appeared, and within moments, we were surrounded. The place was crawling with people we hadn't anticipated, people who were prepared for us, people who knew exactly how we were operating. It became painfully clear that every step we had taken in the investigation had been anticipated by the mastermind. They had been 2 steps ahead of us the entire time. The situation was chaotic. Our plan was in shambles. We were forced to retreat, but not without casualties. The tension of the moment, the feeling of being trapped, was overwhelming. It was a calculated move, a final play by the mastermind to stop us in our tracks. But as we regrouped and assessed the damage, something even more horrifying emerged. Among the individuals we had captured during the ambush were key players in the operation, people who had been thought to be low-level operatives. But these weren't just criminals. They were high-ranking members of a network that stretched across continents. They were well-known figures, politicians, businessmen, and even law enforcement officials who had been complicit in this global trafficking ring for years. The web of corruption was far larger and more entrenched than we ever imagined. This wasn't just about stopping a criminal operation. This was about taking down a system that had operated in the shadows for decades. And then the ultimate twist hit us. The mastermind we had been chasing, the person we thought was the ultimate figure behind the entire operation, was nothing more than a decoy. The real leader was someone even more powerful, someone who had remained hidden in the shadows the entire time. A person we never suspected. A person who had orchestrated this entire operation from behind the scenes. The true mastermind was part of a global network that had its roots in the highest levels of government, business, and international organizations. The identity of the real mastermind was a shock that nearly paralyzed U.S. It was someone we had interacted with during the investigation, someone whose involvement had seemed so minimal that we had never thought to question them. This person had been quietly manipulating events from behind the scenes, ensuring that we were chasing ghosts, feeding us information that would lead us in circles. And when we discovered their true identity, the depth of the conspiracy hit us all at once. The global trafficking operation was not just a criminal enterprise. It was an organized system that manipulated every level of society, from the streets to the highest offices in the world. This was a war against an enemy that was not just criminal, but systemic, built into the very fabric of our institutions. The revelation shattered everything we thought we knew. We were no longer just trying to stop a human trafficking operation. We were facing a network of power and corruption that had been allowed to fester for decades. We were up against a force that not only trafficked children but controlled the political and social systems that allowed such atrocities to happen without consequence. We were now fighting a war on two fronts, against a criminal organization and against the very system that had allowed it to flourish. The stakes were higher than ever. The investigation had started as a fight for justice for the victims, but now it was a fight for the future. A fight to expose a system that had been hidden in plain sight. With the real mastermind's identity finally revealed, we had a new mission. It wasn't just about capturing them. It was about bringing down the entire network, exposing the people who had allowed this evil to thrive, and ensuring that this corruption would never again see the light of day. But time was running out. The mastermind was preparing to flee, to disappear into the system they had helped build. If we didn't act now, we risked losing everything: the children we had already saved, the evidence we had gathered, and the future of anyone who was still trapped in the system. The clock was ticking, and this would be the final confrontation. We had no choice but to face it head-on. Tea was over. Or so we thought. In the aftermath of the final confrontation, we began to process everything we had learned, everything we had witnessed. The investigation that had started with the simple rescue of a child from a submerged car had evolved into a battle against an unimaginable global conspiracy, a system of human trafficking, corruption, and manipulation that reached the highest levels of society. The true mastermind was no longer just a name on a list. They were exposed, their network broken down, and their criminal empire dismantled. But as we reflected on the journey, one thing became clear. While we had won this battle, the war was far from over. The world we live in is not as simple as we would like to believe. There are shadows lurking in places we never think to look, and systems in place that allow evil to thrive without question. The trafficking of children, the manipulation of institutions, these things are not isolated problems. They are symptoms of a deeper, more insidious sickness that runs through the veins of society. What we uncovered in our investigation was only the tip of the iceberg. There are still so many victims out there, still so many lives to be saved. The victory we had achieved wasn't just about capturing a criminal mastermind or exposing a global network. It was about starting the conversation. It was about shining a light on the darkness that so many try to ignore, about making people realize that the fight for justice is never truly over. We may have taken down one system of corruption, but there will always be another unless we remain vigilant. This is a battle that requires constant vigilance, constant action, and a relentless commitment to truth. The baby we had rescued that day, the one whose life had hung in the balance when we pulled him from the water, was a symbol of hope. His survival was more than just a miracle. It was a reminder that no matter how dire the situation seems, there is always a chance for redemption. The lives we save are not just numbers or statistics. They are people. They are futures. And every time we save a life, we change the world, one person at a time. For the team, this journey was transformative. It tested us in ways we never thought possible. We had to face our own fears, confront our own weaknesses, and overcome the darkness that threatened to consume us. The personal cost of this investigation was high. We lost friends, we lost allies, and we came face to face with the harsh reality that the systems we trust are not always what they seem. But through it all, we stood firm. And in the end, we did what had to be done. I look back now, and I realize how much this case has changed me. It has made me more aware of the world around me, more attuned to the injustices that still exist. But it has also reminded me that there is hope. The good people who work tirelessly to make a difference, the ones who fight even when the odds are stacked against them, they are the ones who keep the light burning. And as long as that light remains, there is always the possibility of change. The lessons we learned were invaluable. We learned that justice isn't always easy. It doesn't always come quickly, and it doesn't always come without sacrifice. But justice is worth fighting for. We learned that no system is too big to be brought down, no conspiracy too deep to expose. We learned that every life matters, and that even the smallest act of courage can have a ripple effect that changes the world. And we learned that, in the end, Saving a life isn't just about saving one person. It's about saving the future. It's about making the world a better place, one person at a time. As I reflect on all that we accomplished, one truth stands out, because, in the end, saving a life is saving an entire world.